Hello and welcome to the Mighty Oaks Show. My name is Jeremy Stalnecker, the Executive Director of the Mighty Oaks Foundation, here with Chad Robichaux, the President and Founder of the Mighty Oaks Foundation, and kind of a rare thing for us where we're all in the same place, we're both in the same place at the same time.
Yeah, I'm usually off in Arizona in my little cave, and we're talking remotely. So
hiding somewhere, and we do most of our business over the phone and most of our interviews remotely. But it's great to be together, and so we thought we'd take the opportunity to talk about some things today, to record a show and talk about some things that are, I think, interesting, but very relevant, and then current, based on some kind of things that have unfolded for us over the last couple of weeks. If you follow the Mighty Oaks Foundation, and I hope that you do, and if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube page, please do that. Subscribe now. You can hit the notification bell. That lets you know when new things come on YouTube, and that lets you follow really what we're going through and what we're dealing with. Put a lot of content on there, and some of the content recently has been in regards to a bit of a riff, the controversy we've had with YouTube, this platform. Tried to put an ad up, and again, if you followed us, you've seen all of this, but tried to put an ad up with the keyword Christian in it. And there was a pushback from them, and then a lot of discussion, a lot of conversation, and as of the date of this airing, they have corrected themselves on that.
Yeah. At first, the keyword Christian was considered a unauthorized word, which, historically we've used that word for some time to reach our audience, and very important for us to reach, members of the faith community.
Right.
And so, thankfully, so many people got behind us. A lot of media outlets had us on, like Fox News. I was on Fox and Friends, One American News, places like that. And so we really brought some great attention to it. And thankfully, as it is now, Google and YouTube has done the right thing and taken that down. And so you kind of like leads you to ask the question, like, why would that happen? Like, what does Google and YouTube like maliciously hate Christians?
Right. Like
that they made this policy because they hate Christians, and I don't believe that to be the case.
Yeah.
I think what happens, is people in this political climate right now, whether you choose to be political or not, you just get grouped into a political category, either in one group or in another.
Yes.
You don't have to be a political participant or not.
Right.
You're going to get grouped in conservative Christians, because most Christians would live conservative lives or have conservative beliefs and principles, get grouped into right-wing political group.
Right.
And there's a lot of talk about Google trying to censor right-wing people and really close down the voice of the right-wing side. So I believe we got just put in a political group.
Yep. I think, and we talked about this earlier, I think some of that is very sincere too. We look at even our public education system and our public university system, the things that the people who are doing we'll call it censoring. I mean, I know there's a very specific definition there, but who are saying that's not acceptable. What those people have been taught since the time they were very small children is that there's good and there's bad, there's right and there's wrong. And those who would consider themselves conservatives or Christians, we even talked about the word patriot earlier today, they are against what's right. And so it's not as much about them saying we have decided we don't like Christians as it is having been taught systematically throughout their lives that these words all represent hate and they represent oppression. And so what they're trying to do is really maintain what they would consider an open forum, but we would look at it and say, no, they're shutting down our voice and the breadth of speech.
Yeah, Fox News, I'm sourcing Fox News on this. They said that Google defines patriot, or the synonyms that Google uses for the word patriot, is nationalist, loyalist, isolationist, and a xenophobe. And the Webster Dictionary defines patriot as one who loves and supports their country.
Yeah. There's a
pretty big difference.
There's quite a margin between those two, right?
A pretty big difference.
And so, we could talk about this, and in fact, we have quite a bit over the last week, you and I and others, and we've had discussions about what all of this means. And really, I think, for me, certainly, what it's done more than anything is bring up the question of living in the United States right now, as a Christian, as a conservative Christian. And we would say, certainly there are some people who would identify themselves as Christians who are not politically conservative. But as a conservative Christian living in America today, it creates a unique challenge environment for us to live.
Yeah.
And the question in that for me, one that I have been asked, one that I've had to ponder, one that we talked about earlier today at length, is how do Christians today, particularly conservative Christians today, living in the United States, deal with or respond to things like you just read, and organizations that, whether they're malicious or not, they push back on who we are, and persecution in one area or another? How do Christians respond to that? I think that's a very, very important question to answer, and one that, at least individually, folks have got to come to some baseline on for themselves. Well, or else they'll always be driven one way or the other.
If not, you're going to try to navigate this unknown, and you're going to get pushed back and forth by emotion, and you're going to be frustrated and angered. I found myself there.
Yeah.
I mean, I
think we all do, right?
When this incident first happened last week, I felt like, man, I gotta hold the ground. I gotta hold the line. I gotta stand my ground. I gotta fight for what's right. I gotta defend the Christian faith. It's not about just Mighty Oaks. It's about every Christian organization in the world that now have to defend us.
Right.
I felt that.
Right. So separating emotion from the reality of that is important.
Yeah.
And we see people that do very extreme things in response to, on both sides of these arguments, by the way, responding very extremely to what really could be rationally walked to, perhaps, if a decision was made ahead of time. We always talk about a pre-decision.
Right.
But how do we deal with these things? And then, I take it even beyond that as someone with kids. We both have kids. And how do I help my kids navigate the days they're living in? And then I think of grandkids. Your son is married now, and my kids are getting to the age where they may soon be. And you think about grandkids. How do we teach them to navigate these days? And again, very important discussion, and one we could spend a lot of time talking about. But I think a few things need to be understood first, and certainly jump in anywhere that you see fit. But the first thing is, when we talk about persecution, I think we need to understand what real persecution is. There's a difference between people either censoring us, or not liking us, or rejecting who we are and what we believe, and persecuting us.
Even just not supporting us.
That's not persecution.
That's not persecution.
Right? And we can look historically, and I think historical context is very important. If David Barton was here, he could spend the next 3 hours giving us the historical context on this. But we understand that Christians historically, and we'll just talk about Christians, going back to the first century, Jesus Christ lived, he was crucified, he died, he rose again. That's the first century of believers. The early church is being started. We look at everything that unfolded there, and what we have to realize or recognize is that the Christian church was born into a politically hostile environment. And when you get into AD 100 and the early period there, the tremendous persecution from Rome, and then throughout time, it's been that. The government has persecuted for real, as in murdering and killing and separating families. That's real persecution. That's different than just a rejection of an ideal or an idea.
And those things exist in the world today.
And so
there's real persecution of Christians that take place in the world today.
Yeah, I've been working on some things I'm going to communicate in the next couple of weeks about some of these issues, and the thousands and thousands of deaths every year. We're told that in the 20th century, more people were killed, martyred as Christians than in all previous centuries leading up to that point.
Right.
So there is real religious persecution taking place in the world. And so I think that's one thing we have to understand. When we're coming into this argument and we're getting very upset about what's happening, we need to be able to separate out the difference between real persecution, being thrown off of buildings and shot in the town square and thrown in prison, and just a rejection of who we are.
Yeah.
And so the real question then as a Christian is, well, what's actually happening here? And this is something that we talked about a lot, particularly with YouTube and Facebook and these things. When they reject our message and they shut us down, what they're doing is they're silencing us or taking away our ability to communicate our message to others.
That's right.
And that's extremely dangerous. And that can lead to persecution.
It can. Yeah. I mean, where's persecution begin? I mean, it's these slow little things. And this is why freedom of speech in this country is so important, to be able to speak up for these things. And this is why, one voice, having one voice being the only voice in the country is it's just so dangerous. And it's such a dangerous road to go down, because I think once you go down it so far, you can't come back. I mean,
that's
historically, you can't come back from it.
Yep.
And this is why I felt last week just such a burden to speak up, because it scared me, to be honest with you.
Right.
It scared me. That scared me for Mighty Oaks because we can't advertise, but it scared me for our nation. I love our country. I love the freedoms we have in our country. I've seen what you're talking about. I've seen persecution around the world. I haven't firsthand so much seen the Christian persecution. I know it takes place in places I've been, but I've seen the persecution of religious groups in different countries, and it's scary to me. It should be scary to everyone.
Yeah, and when someone controls, as some of these platforms do, the voice, that puts us in a place where we can be silenced and then can be persecuted. And so, in that and understanding that, again, in context, I have to ask the question, I try to ask the question, well, what do we do then?
Yeah.
And I don't think the answer is we do nothing. But I think we need to take a measured approach. We look at, again, go to the Bible, and I think that's where truth should be found. The book of Ephesians is a book written to a pastor who was in Ephesus, Timothy. Timothy was in Ephesus. It was written by the Apostle Paul. This is a tremendously pagan environment, an incredibly anti-Christian environment. And Paul's admonition to the pastor who was there in that city was, preach the word, teach the word, proclaim the truth. And I think as we deal with many of these issues, we have to understand that our first priority as Christians is to proclaim the truth. And the greatest way to combat error is through truth, which is why people hate those who proclaim the truth.
Right.
And so
the Bible says they will.
And the Bible says they will.
Yeah.
The Bible tells us that all who will live godly will suffer persecution. And again, what does that look like? Maybe different from place to place and age to age. But we have to understand that our first priority is to proclaim the truth. So when we're dealing with these issues, I think we have to be very careful. Not just this issue. This is kind of a springboard to talk about the larger, kind of broader issues. We talk about things like abortion in our country and different sexual lifestyles and all of the things that Christians have to deal with in this country, and the persecutions, silencing, censorship that comes along with those things. These are the issues we're dealing with. And so what's our number one priority? Well, our number one priority, the Bible would say, is to glorify God. And how do we do that? We do that by proclaiming the truth, by telling others that there is a God who loves them, that He has provided the way of salvation, forgiveness, and wholeness to them, if only they will accept and receive that gift. And I think that's a starting place. Mm-hmm. As Christians, we have to be diligent about that. So that's the first part. But there is a second part to that. And the second part is, as Christians, what do we do, beyond that? And I think recognizing that when someone has the ability to take away our ability to proclaim the truth, right, then we have to figure out how to push back against that.
And then this was, for us, this was a great test because, while I had this kind of emotional response and I really wanted to just lash out, I not only represent myself as a Christian, but I represent Mighty Oaks as a ministry, and I represent God as an ambassador for Christ. And so, we just really had to think about how we're going to communicate this message of where we're feeling we were being censored, and how we're going to handle it gracefully. And one of the things that happened in this situation with us was when we tried to run the word Christian, and it wasn't allowed. We tried it with other religions as well. So we ran the word Muslim, and it actually ran. The ad ran, and that's when we realized there was a bias there. And so instead of going on the media and saying, throwing a tantrum about this, we're trying to be graceful about it and say, hey, fair is fair. Like Muslims should be able to, because we're saying we shouldn't be censored, but Muslims shouldn't be censored. Right. Other religions shouldn't be censored. Buddhists shouldn't be censored. Right. It should all equally be. And so we didn't go out and say, hey, why are they running ad on Muslims? Like, Muslims are, it should be for everyone. Right. And so the way we handled that, for me, at least for me, I tried to make an attempt to handle it as grace. Not
everyone heard that, I don't think.
Not everyone heard that because, and not everyone heard that because everyone, people are scared, they're mad, but I think that's why I think this conversation is so important.
I think people are looking for a reason to be mad, and
very much
that's
true.
Why we have to think through these things in a logical, systematic way, right? On both sides, people are looking for a reason to be mad. Yeah. So again, for me, the process is understand that your first priority is proclaiming truth, glorifying God, proclaiming truth. the next thing is, if there is something or someone that is preventing you from proclaiming truth, you have to deal with that. And I think we need to, again, go to the Bible and ask the question, how do we deal with that? Well, we deal with that by identifying error. So you proclaim truth and you identify error. What some people will say is, well, again, we'll look at the abortion issue, for instance. In my opinion, and I think we agree on this, the greatest blight in America right now is legal abortion.
Yeah,
that is
my number one.
That is the number one issue in my opinion. And so we look at that and we say, well, that's wrong. So what we should do is we should blow up abortion clinics, and we should, physically harm people who are in favor of that. But we have a system of government that would protect them. So that's not the action that we look at. Laws in place. So what we do is we say, well, my priority is to identify truth and proclaim truth, to stand up against that which would prevent me from proclaiming truth by pointing out error. Again, we go to the Bible and we say, well, what did those in the first century who were being persecuted by the government and others, again, Rome, well documented, not only permitting abortion and homosexuality and those things, but often pushing those on its citizens. What did the Christians at that time do? They pointed out the error. They said, this is wrong. We don't agree with this. This is preventing us from doing what we're supposed to do. And again, in this example, last week, I think that's what we did. We said, well, this is wrong. There's nothing we can actually do about it. We're not going to go march on YouTube headquarters, but we're going to say our number one priority is proclaim truth. We've identified something that's preventing us from doing that. So we're going to point out error where error exists. And, the Bible talks about justice, and I think that's what we do. And then, moving beyond that, I think as Christians, we also have to understand that God is sovereign and He's God, right, and that we're not God. And so we do what we can in those areas or those lanes, and then we trust that God will do what God is supposed to do. Yeah. And I think often one of the dangers of Christians getting involved in many of these things is that they transition their focus from proclaiming truth, pointing out error. They transition their focus from that
to winning a fight.
Yeah. And when you get to that point, what you're saying in essence is, God is not big enough to deal with this. I need to deal with this now. And again, at the risk of sounding, like a pacifist, because I'm not, and I believe in standing up for what's right and defending yourself when there is harm, and I will stand up for my family and I'll stand up for my community, and I believe in those things. When we, are provoked to that place, we need to defend ourselves and defend what we believe. But we also have to understand there's a higher standard and a higher call than just us getting what we want in this environment or any other environment. But as Christians, it's very hard to do in the politically charged world in which we live.
So this is one of the topics that I'd like to dig a little bit further in is, so obviously not everyone, it would seem like everyone in the country's political right now, right? Yeah. But not everyone's political. Right. A lot of people just don't care. Right. They go about their everyday life and don't care. Right. But and I just have to say it, there's a group on the left side of the political spectrum that will classify every single person, every member of our society into a political class. Yes. And say, because you believe, whether you're political or not, because you believe this or you have certain principles, if you're a Christian, then you're in this political group, and then they'll attack you over it. And so how do you navigate that?
I think you navigate it with integrity. I think you have to understand and identify that you can't change that. Right. I can't change that. I can't fix that. But what I can do is be a man of character, a husband of character, a father of character. I can have integrity in my life. I can proclaim truth. I can point out error. I can stand for what's right and against what's wrong. I can be consistent in my life and just understand that the only perfect person who ever walked on the earth was also put into a category that was false and was murdered for what he proclaimed, which was truth. And we're talking about Jesus. So we just have to accept on some level that others are going to classify us wrong. But that's not just politically. That's family members. Right. It's coworkers. We can't control what other people think about us. beyond us being able to live lives of integrity and lives of truth and not be hypocrites. And if we'll do that, that's what we can do. That's what we can control. And I don't think we can control anything else, which is why I think, and we've talked about this a lot, but why I believe, for instance, why we do a show like this. We're not the smartest guys in the world. I mean, I like to believe we are, but we're probably not, right? There are probably a few people smarter than us.
Yeah. God didn't gift me with math because I would take over the world. Right. He limits us.
But we do this show because we want to have real conversations about things that are real, that actually impact our lives. And I think as Christians, as anyone, not just Christians, but as people, we need to have real conversations about real issues and come to real conclusions that are more than an eighth of an inch deep, which I think is often how we live. We see an issue, we respond emotionally to it, and we get no further than that.
We deal with that even planning the show, right? We want to have conversations like, oh wait, we can't talk about that because that's political.
Right. We try to be very careful about what we even talk about. Yeah,
but I mean, in a lot of these very important topics, if you're not careful, you'll let that view and other people categorizing you.
Yeah.
You'll let them hijack these important topics, like abortion. The topic of abortion right now, people would say is a political topic. It's not political.
There's nothing political about it.
There's nothing political. It's a humanity issue.
Right.
And Democrat, Republican, those words have no weight on me in my view of abortion.
No, I believe, again, that we should look at everything from a biblical perspective, have a biblical worldview, and that's what we talk about, on this show, looking at things biblically. And the problem is we've lost our ability to do that because we want to stay true to the camp that we're in, or we're afraid someone's going to miscategorize us or classify us. I think that's true of all of the issues that we're dealing with, whether it's some of the other issues we've decided not to talk about, like the border stuff that's going on at the border. We talk about compassion. And that's not a left or a right. No. Compassion is about sharing with others, demonstrating it and offering grace and helping people. But there's a real right way to do that, and there is a wrong way to do that. Right. That's not about left and right, and it shouldn't be that type of an issue. We talk about socialism in America and the rise of socialism and what does that look like. To me, that's not a left and right issue, but it's been so politicized that if you are here, you believe one thing. Mm-hmm. If you're here, you believe something else. Instead of stepping back and saying, what would the Bible have us?
Yeah. And the Bible has answers to all those things.
Has answers to all of those questions. And we have become afraid, I think, because of what you just said, to deal with some of these things because of what other people will think about us.
And by the way, I'm not saying don't be political. I would expect,
sure,
especially right now in our country, I would expect every single American, whatever you believe, to be at those polls in 2020 because our country is dependent on.
So I've said this before, politics isn't a real thing. I know we call it that, and it has a real meaning. It means the body of governance, the political body. But our politics, our politicians should reflect who we are as people.
Right.
So this is where I don't think that there's sacred and secular, there's Christian and political, and there's people who say, because I'm a Christian, I'm going to bow out of the political. Yeah. I don't believe you have the opportunity to do that because how you vote, the things you care about, those should be a reflection of who you are as a person.
Yeah, the fabric of our nation depends on the people.
Right.
I mean, frankly, getting off their butts on election day and taking the time out because it's you can't if you don't vote in this country. I mean, we've both been to places where people can't vote, and you talk about persecution. People go out and try to vote, and they're persecuted and killed for going out and voting. There, people are standing outside of places, voting places, and killing people for trying to vote. I mean, if you don't go vote in this country, you have no business at all shaking your fist at the government after election day.
And I think dealing with the framework that I just laid out. Proclaiming truth. We have the opportunity to do that with how we vote. Mm-hmm. Proclaiming truth. That's truth. Or that's more truth than that truth. Pointing out error. That's wrong. Standing up for what's right, but understanding at the end there's a higher power than us. We have a mechanism to do that in the United States, and we need to do that. And that's part of the problem.
Through casting our vote, right?
Through casting our vote. Through supporting those who are proclaiming truth and who are standing in the gap.
And taking your role in appointing leaders.
And how many people are not doing that who will get really upset about something they see on Facebook or Twitter?
When you vote, though, I mean, this is where you said this earlier. Are you more loyal to the camp that you've claimed, or are you more loyal to biblical truths for the values of the person you're voting for?
Right. You should always be more biblical or more loyal to the biblical view.
Of course.
And so, this is where you'll sit in a church service or hear pastors or others who lead church ministries say, well, I can't endorse a candidate. This is not a political place. It's an apolitical place. I think the strongest thing a pastor could do or a ministry leader could do is say, I'm not going to tell you how to vote or who to vote for, but I am going to tell you to vote according to biblical principle. And that biblical principle should guide how you vote. And that's not a political statement.
Yeah.
That is saying, let how you vote be a reflection of who you are and what you believe. It's not about left or right. And then, unfortunately, we live in a left and right world, and both of us would fall, much more right than we would left on most things. But that cannot be what causes us to act and live the way that we do. Integrity says, I'll do what is right, whether anyone sees it or not, whether people understand it or not. I'll do the right thing for the rest of my life, regardless of where I fall.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to say than it is to do.
I think we've lost political camps, by the way. Anyways, there's no Republican or Democrat anymore right now.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's freedom versus tyranny.
I think that's right. Yeah, how much difference is there between the left and the right? Not much. There is some. And there are some very good people.
Yeah.
On one side of the aisle, and some other confused people on the other side of the aisle. That's not a political statement; it's just a true statement. But so this is a hard thing to deal with. Again, we could talk about this all day, but my encouragement certainly, and I think we would agree on this, that you have to look at things and not respond emotionally, but respond in a way you've determined ahead of time. The first question you should always ask is, as a Christian, how should I respond to this? And as a Christian, I think you've been called to proclaim truth. You've been called to proclaim truth, to identify error where it exists, because sometimes you can't proclaim truth because of the error. Identify it, deal with it to the extent that you can, but then trust that there is a God and that God is not you.
No WWJD. What would Jeremy do?
No, you cannot be what would Jeremy do, because you'll make the wrong decision. But ask what would Jesus do.
What would Jesus do? Yeah.
And I don't know that Jesus ever voted in an election, so maybe we'll get David on here at some point to help us out with that one. But
I think David might disagree with you.
He may very well disagree.
He's gonna pull out some.
He probably has a document.
He's gonna reach in his bag and pull out some piece of stone that's carved in with JC inscripted in the bottom of it.
And it was his ballot. Yeah, that may be.
If it exists, David has it.
He has it
at Wall Builders.
Okay, so quickly we got off topic, but I hope that's a help to you. Again, I would say that we don't have the answer to all the questions, but certainly the admonition would be, at least from me, I think from you too. I don't know, but I think from you too, that responding to any of these issues from a purely emotional position is dangerous.
It's never good to respond in emotion.
And honestly, you may survive, but your kids aren't going to survive responding that way. You haven't given them a process to follow. Your grandkids aren't going to know how to respond to things, because all you've demonstrated to them is however you feel, that's how you respond. And that's not how we deal with these issues. We need to understand, what is my call? What have I been called to do? What have I been told to do? How do I deal with error? And if things don't go my way, how do I deal with that? And I think if we'll keep that framework in front of us, it will help guide and navigate a lot of these issues.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you. And that was a shorter segment, but I hope it's a help to you. This is very timely for us and just something we want to talk about while we're together. So hope this helped to you. Again, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do that. Hit the notification bell. That lets you know when new episodes come online. And apart from our show, we have stuff coming online all the time. We're always putting out content that's designed to be helpful to you. That's the reason we do it. I hope it is. Thank you. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.